Good evening. Good evening. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Planet Hog, and we are here today. We are here today because of the great Un-Wokening. That's right, someone has given the dumbass Democrats a clue that woke is a joke. And, well, let's be fair here. They knew, the majority of them, I'd like to believe, at least a substantial portion of them, because they're not all, when we talk woke, we're really talking about the fringe elements of their party that coincidentally have the loudest voices. But nevertheless, they do represent a disproportionate minority of their party. And that works on two levels because they're mostly non-white folks. But anyhow, we find ourselves today behind enemy lines on, what website is this here? Is this Yahoo? This is Yahoo News. And of course, everything that I'm referencing I will throw down in the description for you to peruse at your leisure. But we find ourselves on Yahoo News, where the headline reads, Democrats wake up to woke message turning off voters. Okay, some Democrats are increasingly questioning whether liberal rhetoric on hot-button issues such as policing and education could alienate centrist voters they'll need to win over in the next midterm elections. Now, right off the bat, this is... you just can't play it straight. We'll see what they do, right? But right off the bat, notice the two things that they bring up as examples of the woke message turning off voters: policing and education. Education being critical race theory. Now, bearing in mind, these articles, the person doesn't just write them and stick them on the internet. I know it reads that way a lot of the time, but they have to get approval. And Yahoo, make no bones about it, despite the tone of this article, is a left-leaning publication. Most of them are. So they'll give you the policing because, well, they've already begun to, Minneapolis specifically, and a lot of these other places that have quote-unquote defunded the police have already quietly begun to reallocate funding there. And I don't even know how quiet it is. It was in the Minneapolis, I forget the name of that publication. But it was in there. So I don't know how quote-unquote quiet it is. They've already kind of eaten crow on that one. And to be honest, there's really no admission when your crime rates have spiraled to, multi-hundred percentiles worse than what they were. So that's an easy one. And education, critical race theory. Well, they've already admitted, and by they I'm talking about historians, people who actually study history. Because you get a lot of these self-proclaimed historians, people who, read a couple, watch a couple videos, maybe read a couple articles, and they call themselves a historian. No, that's not how that works. Historians actually study this. That was their focus in higher education. So a lot of those historians have come out and decried the 1619 Project as being factually erroneous. Who knew? So for them to throw up policing and education, well, those were the low-hanging fruits. And speaking of fruits, how about the homosexual agenda? Yeah, that's a hot-button issue, but see, they won't put that in there. Not yet. How about this whole gender fluidity? They won't put that in there. Not yet. But don't be mistaken. Those are the issues, especially in middle America. All right, let's move on. The concerns are playing out against the backdrop of rising crime levels in cities across the country. There it is, quietly, right? And a growing movement of parents fighting the indoctrination of radicalized curricula to public schools. Polls have shown that Democratic voters are listing crime as a top issue, even over the pandemic, which has, for months, dominated the concerns of voters of the left. No, it's dominated their media. And maybe you had some simpletons who were scared because all they can see on CNN literally is a rising ticker counting and tabulating every quote-unquote death due to coronavirus. But the crime, that makes sense to me because most Democrat voters live in major metropolitan areas, and that's where all this crime, coincidentally, is taking place. A poll published last week by Navigator Research, a Democratic firm, showed the majority of voters from both parties and independents, as well as white, black, and Hispanic voters, cited violent crime as, quote, a major crisis. Who knew? Who knew that defunding the police would actually make crime go up, right? Crime rates have climbed in most major cities since last year. New York City, for example, has seen a 73% increase in shootings. Atlanta has endured a 53% increase in murders since 2019, and Chicago saw a 41% jump in murders over that time frame. The sobering statistics have prompted some in the party to advocate for moving away from, quote, the defund the police, end quote, movement that arose after the, this should be in quotes, murder of George Floyd last year by a white police officer. Charles Lipson, political science professor emeritus at the University of Chicago, pointed to Democratic losses at the congressional level in 2020 that some centrists have blamed on police defunding rhetoric. Not just that, but again, you can't expect these people to admit that, I'll put this to you guys. Can you name me one purely Democratic initiative, one idea that they've concocted and brought to the table that has not ended in catastrophe? I'll wait. Just one idea that the Democrats came up with on their own that did not end in mass death, mass unrest, mass poverty. Everything, these motherfuckers are Wile E. Coyote. Everything they do blows up in their face. And ours, coincidentally. Quote, mainstream Democrats got kicked in the crotch pretty hard during the last election over the defund the police strategy, Lipson said. What you saw in the last election was the elephant going over the cliff, but you hadn't heard the splat. What you're hearing now is the splat. Interesting choice of words that he went with elephant and not donkey. President Joe Biden has worked to shift the perception that his party is soft on crime. Okay. Remember the last time Joe Biden decided to shift to show he wasn't soft on crime? Okay. Delivering a speech last month dedicated to his administration's efforts to combat violence. Biden has focused his anti-crime strategy particularly on guns, however, and less on stepping up law enforcement to crack down on crime directly. Ooh, they're actually calling Joe Biden out here. At a meeting with top aides at the White House on Monday, Biden spoke about the need to support law enforcement, potentially addressing a criticism Republicans have leveled at the left about what they say is a dismissive attitude toward police. That's what it is. I'm sorry, it is a dismissive attitude toward police. Banning, what's that stupid show? With the little, it's a kid's show. I can't think of it right now. But the dog's a cop. It's like a little dog and he's a cop. Banning that. Making all police out to be killers. Defunding them. How about a DA? How about these radical DAs that just let people walk? Basically undermining their authority. How about these politicians in these cities where police are being bombarded refusing to call that out? So yeah, it is a very dismissive attitude toward police, unless you're Lori Lightfoot and the rioters are coming from your house. Well, then we want the police there to keep them out. And look, at the same time that I get on them, if you're a fucking cop and you're still putting up with this shit, man, well, look. Can't defend people who don't defend themselves. I mean, if it's just a paycheck and you're just showing up, then that is what it is. But I mean, there are other jobs out there. Especially now, nobody's working. David Hopkins, political science professor at Boston College, said some of the tensions on display with Democrats come from elected officials attempting to balance the demands of activists with the needs of large swaths of their base. Quote, the electorate is not the same as the world of social media activism, and there are plenty of important constituencies within the Democratic Party who want a lot of competent policing, who want to focus on solutions to violence, who want education policy that is focused on good results, Hopkins said. And so, the quote continues, even before we get to the question of, is this how you win the swing vote, even just within the Democratic Party, there's, I think, maybe a not quite appreciated level of internal disagreement about a lot of these issues, he added. And we'll come to that in a little bit. Yeah, internal disagreement. They're fighting each other right now. It is the Democrats' version of civil war. The results of the New York City mayoral primary have given Democrats even more reason to question their language on policing and public safety. Eric Adams, a former NYPD officer, won the city's Democratic primary earlier this month after running on a pro-law enforcement platform that eschewed much of the liberal rhetoric around the policing debate. His victory and the race itself caught the attention of Democrats across the country because the more liberal candidates in the primary did not perform as well as the centrists in the race. Democrats are also struggling with messaging around critical race theory, a broad term for types of curricula or school policy that encourages students to see themselves and others through the lens of race. Yes, it encourages racism. What's that called? When you see people through the lens of race, it's called racism. And I can't believe we're having this discussion in 2021. But they're the same people they've always been. Some liberals have denied that critical race theory is actually taught in any classroom outside of colleges and universities, because that's okay. Well, we don't teach it. We only teach it to the people who are about to jump into society and start shaping the world, not the little ones. While others have defended it on the basis that those opposed simply want to whitewash American history. Republican state leaders have enacted numerous bans on teaching critical race theory, but the issue continues to animate local communities and school board races across the country, and could factor into races for higher offices heading into the midterm election. For example, the Virginia gubernatorial race, which voters will decide later this year, has focused heavily on critical race theory as Republican candidate Glenn Youngkin has run on stopping the practice in the state. But while the Republican Party is unified in its opposition to critical race theory and has put forward a consistent message for parents, Democrats have yet to coalesce around a strategy. We're talking about an issue that is playing out in some of the suburbs they hope to retain next September. Some Democrat strategists are sounding the alarm on rhetoric about identity politics that many centrist voters could find alienating. Famed Democrat operative James Carville drew headlines earlier this year when he slammed the party's fixation on wokeness at the expense of crafting a relatable message. And ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the article. But it goes deeper than that, doesn't it? See, this like I said, this article focused on the low-hanging fruits. defunding the police, critical race theory. And yes, those things are terrible. Absolutely, as are most things that Democrats put forward. But that's not the whole story. You see, this party has been taking L's since they lost the election. Joe Biden started his presidency with I believe it was a 46% approval rating. The lowest of any president ever. Which makes sense because he's the most popular president ever, if you believe the election results. So here you had the most popular president of all time, presidential candidate, I should say, of all time, even higher than fucking Big Ear Obama. He was even more popular than Obama. But before he did anything, his approval rating was less than 50%. Well, you don't have to be a mathematician to figure out. Wait a minute. If less than 50% of the people of the country actually approve of him, how did he win the popular vote? Oh, he didn't. Anyway, that aside, but they've been taking L's pretty consistently. And if you want to look at the divide, the fissure that has formed in this party, look no further than the AOC Nancy Pelosi clashes that happened last year and are continuing to happen. Remember the Democrat primary? When AOC was given a grand total of 1 minute to speak? How about what's going on with Cuba now? Who was the one pushing socialism? Who was the one saying communism is a good thing? Oh, that would be the Democrat Party. But then you have Cuba, and what's happening with Cuba all over the news. That's another L. We need to distance ourselves from that too. And then, like I said, you have the defund the police, where crime is going through the roof. You do have critical race theory, where you're teaching all white kids that you are just Satan's spawn. All of these things are alienating. But how about AOC's most recent faux pas? Perhaps you've heard. She had a little back and forth with some conservative correspondent on Twitter talking about her business and how her business was not capitalism. And then she proceeded to go on and explain what she did with her business. Well, first of all, the reasons she gave, right, did not make her statement. Again, put it a different way. The statement she gave did not disprove the fact that her business was capitalist. I'll read the tweet. She's tweeting to a man named Sean Spicer. Says, not sure if you know this, Sean, but transactions aren't capitalism. Capitalism is a system that prioritizes profit at any and all human/environmental cost. But for what it's worth, our shop is unionized, doesn't operate for profit, and funds projects like free tutoring, food programs, and local organizing. Well, first of all, if you have a business that doesn't operate for profit, you don't have a fucking business. If you don't make a profit, you can't keep the lights on. You cannot do these things she's talking about. Again, if you do not make a profit, which means you make more money than whatever the product is that you're giving, this doesn't mean you have to stick it in your purse and go home and buy a fancy airplane, which she has. But it means you have to come out on top. Otherwise, how do you keep the fucking lights on? How do you keep your people paid? So anyway, not only does the unionization, not operating for profit, quote unquote, funding projects like, and again, how do you fund these projects if you don't make a profit? Free tutoring. Not sure how you fund free tutoring, but all right, it's AOC's world. food programs, and local organizing. Okay, all of these things don't preclude you from being capitalistic. The sad part about this, ladies and gentlemen, is AOC has a bachelor's degree in business. And I've said before, and I'll say again, the only people that in the world that are dumber than this bitch right here are the people that vote for her. This is one supremely stupid person. Maybe there's a reason she was just a fucking bartender. Because every time this woman opens her mouth, I add another 10 years onto the grand total of how long it'll be before I ever vote for a female politician ever again. So far, we're at about 1,100 years. But maybe it's her putting her foot in her mouth over and over again. Maybe it's her running Amazon out of New York. Maybe it's dumb shit like that that has the Democrats about to cut bait with the extremists in their party. I was watching the Timcast today, and he was talking about how there was a candidate that ran for office in, I think, Ohio, somewhere in Middle America, a Democrat. He had I think he said it was a 3-minute ad. I'm still trying to find it. But he said he had a 3-minute advertisement for his candidacy for office. And you know what he never said during that entire 3 minutes? He never said he was a fucking Democrat. But this is not a victory. This is not a victory. This is the people, the establishment trying to reassert itself. Remember, these people are duplicitous. Remember that these people are scumbags. Remember that these people are conniving. So even though they'll call out their own bullshit, that doesn't mean that they'll stop doing it. That means they'll stop right now. Because we're about to hit an election cycle soon, at least for the midterms. And they're concerned about their standing in Middle America, which they should be. Because perhaps, and if you're not from a Middle America, we're talking about Nebraska, Oklahoma, Ohio, Indiana, the flyover states, as they're termed from time to time. With very few exceptions, excuse me, with very few exceptions, those people, the dichotomy between them and the conservatives, the differences between them and the conservatives, very minimal. Very, very minimal. Usually comes down to something like education, maybe something like workers' rights. But in terms of social issues, they're pretty much on par with each other. There's not as pronounced a difference between Democrat and Republican in Middle America as there is in, say, New Jersey, New York, even here in Florida. That chasm that separates liberal and conservative is not as pronounced in Middle America. So yes, they must necessarily stop with this women can be men shit. Again, they won't say that yet. And they really can't because, well, look, Joe Biden has an it in his cabinet. She puts the it in cabinet. But they can necessarily start to separate themselves from the people who are pro-socialism, pro-communism, because, well, like I said, it's all in the news with Cuba. But this is not the leopard changing its spots. This is them realizing that power, which is what motivates them, because through power they get everything else they want, particularly money, influence. But this is them realizing that all of that is in jeopardy now. Because people are sick of the bullshit. because people are sick of this anti-American, anti-white, whatever you want to call it, this racist horseshit, this dumbass defund the police shit, this men can be women and children should be trans, all this fucking sick shit that's coming from the extremist portion of their group. But see, they box themselves into a corner, as liberals tend to do. And you will box yourself in a corner when you say anything to anybody at any time. See, they're a feminist when they need to be. They're pro-black when they need to be. They're pro-brown when they need to be. They're pro-cop when they need to be. They're pro-white when they need to be. They're pro-gay when they need to be. They're pro-straight when they need to be. But how do you rectify, for example, being the party of feminism and women can do anything and everything and yes, but also be the party of trans should play women's sports? Well, now you're pretty much expunging the woman from women's sports. And this is how liberalism eats itself. How can you be woke, pro-black, co-signing dumb shit like Asians are honorary white people, and then when Asians are getting the shit beat out of them by random hoodlums, blacks with a capital B, well, now you want to do Stop Asian Hate. This is how they always end up eating themselves. Because again, when you don't have any scruples, when you don't have a spine, when you really don't have they do have morals, but they're what I like to call situational morals. They're able to be turned on and off when the situation benefits them. When you are like that, inevitably you are going to contradict yourself. But what Democrats always do, like Fauci right now with Rand Paul, and maybe we'll talk about this tomorrow, they double down on their bullshit instead of admitting when they're wrong and facing the consequences. They just double down on the bullshit. And now it's biting them in the ass. Now it is biting them in the ass. Because you have, like we read in the article, you had a guy who ran in New York, who ran as a Democrat, but also ran as anti-woke. Now he's since walked that back. Because again, like I said, they don't change. It's just situational. And that's why I don't trust this at all. All of this shit, you mark my words, all of this shit will be back. This is tantamount to an inflatable Santa Claus, a little Rudolph display in a snow globe. If I had it out in my front yard in March, you'd look at me like I was fucking insane. But if I have it out in early November, well, I'm right on time, aren't I? If I have it out in December, hey, nothing to see here, just another house with Christmas decorations. And that's how they are with their stances, with their politics, with the things that they say they care about. They are no different than holiday decorations. They're out for the right time of year, and then they put them away until they need them again. Anyway, folks, that's what I got for you today. I appreciate each and every one of you guys tuning in. So, until the next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.